1966, in Hendersonville, North Carolina, 43-year-old Vernon Shipman was described as a kind and gentle man who was soft-spoken and at times withdrawn. He enjoyed cooking large Sunday dinners for anywhere from 6 to 20 people at his home that he shared with his father at 1021 Maple Street in Hendersonville. He was also a huge collector of music records. In the 40s, he was drafted into the U.S. Army, but for unknown reasons, never left the States and returned home within a year without discharge papers. He was a graduate of Blanton's Business College in Asheville and would become one of the best typists in the state. During the late 1940s or early 1950s, Vernon and a man named Charles Glass would become fast friends. They were both homosexual, and in 1952, the men co-founded the Tempo Music Shop in Hendersonville at 244 North Main Street. Vernon was the owner, and Charles managed the business, which was located in the main lobby of the old Bowen Hotel on the corner of 4th Avenue West and Church Street. Later, they moved the business, and it was the place to go in town to buy rock, rhythm, and blues records. Charles was very well known in town, not only as the manager of the shop, but also as an outgoing, flamboyant showman who collected Oriental items and created and sold voodoo charms. He even published a booklet on black magic titled Tales of Voodoo and Black Magic. He attended Asheville High School and served in the U.S. Army briefly, same as Vernon. During the late 1940s, he had lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and sang in opening acts for Esther Phillips, who went by the moniker Little Esther. After Charles moved to Hendersonville, Little Esther visited him and stayed at his house, at which point someone burned a cross in his yard after her visit. Charles also did opening acts for Sister Rosetta Thorpe, who attained popularity in the 1930s and 40s with her gospel recordings. Only a handful of his friends knew about his life and adventures with Little Esther and Rosetta. He also loved Nat King Cole so much that he even wallpapered his bathroom with his album covers. In the early 1950s, the two men made at least 2 records at the WHKP studio. On one of the records is Screamin' and Dyin', and on the flip side is Left My Japanese Baby. Screamin' and Dyin' was released nationwide under the label Magnet. Charles also loved hosting large parties at his house at 200 Wildwood Road in Hendersonville, sometimes with as many as 100 people or more. Both were well known at their music store for being dependable and very punctual. So on July 18, 1966, when they didn't show up for work, their employee, Steve Carlisle, became very concerned. Another employee, Calvert Hunt Jr., told other employees that he had seen Charles and Vernon the day before on Sunday afternoon. He said that Vernon was driving his blue and white 1962 Ford Fairlane on Little River Road toward Flat Rock, and Charles was in the passenger seat. Soon after, Vernon's father, Harley, barged into the Times News and demanded that the editor, Jimmy Fain, stop the presses and replace the front page with a picture of his missing son, Vernon. He said Vernon had not been home since Sunday and must be dead. The circulation manager told the editor that he had seen Vernon on Sunday afternoon driving on Evans Road toward Crab Creek Road. He said Charles was in the passenger seat and there was a man and woman in the back seat. Days later, Vernon's car was found not far from his home on a dirt road that ran parallel to the railroad tracks between 7th Avenue East and Ray Avenue. Vernon's father said the car had an oil change Friday, July 15th, 2 days before his son disappeared. Since then, the car had been driven 259 miles. His father also said that the evening of his son's disappearance, he came home and noticed that the front door was open and Vernon's coat and tie were on his bed, which was strange because Vernon had never left his clothes in his father's room before. Later, a teenage boy came forward and reported that early on Monday morning before 6 a.m., while heading to his summer job, he noticed something that he thought could help the case. He said that when he took North Lake Summit Road, he saw 3 cars near a dirt trail and a total of 4 men. One of the cars was described as the one owned by Vernon, and the others were a 61 or 62 black Ford and a 55 or 56 cream-colored Chevrolet. A man was seen walking towards Vernon's Pontiac, and the other 3 men were seated in the Ford. On July 22, 1966, 5 days after Charles and Vernon's disappearances, two men stumbled on what they initially thought were mannequins while dumping brush near the Green River off North Lake Summit Road. But a foul smell told them that these weren't mannequins. Indeed, they were real, the bodies of two men and a woman's body arranged in a semicircle pattern. On one of the male's bodies had an 18-inch long piece of scrap iron resting on his neck. The other male had crutches laid over his body in the shape of a cross, and on the female's body was a whiskey bottle resting on her neck. At the time, it was common for crime scenes not to be sealed off from the public, and the public was allowed to run amok to sightsee, especially in a small town without a lot of crime. For days, both sides of the road were lined with onlookers in and around the scene, and it was determined the bodies belonged to Vernon, Charles, and 61-year-old Louise Davis Shumate. Police had put together that the three had last been seen alive on Sunday, July 17, 1966. Charles and Vernon had lunch and then stopped by an antique shop and had a short visit there with friends. They had reservations at the country club at 6 p.m. but never arrived. Louise was seen leaving her apartment that Sunday about 4:30 p.m. Their deaths would become widely known as the Henderson triple murders. They had all suffered severe blunt force trauma. A piece of a car jack was found inside Louise, and she also suffered many chest and stomach stabbings and had a broken arm. Charles's crutches from breaking his leg during a bad fall at a supper club were lying there in the shape of a cross. He too had been stabbed many times, but Vernon had not been stabbed. On May 11, 1967, Dennis Waters of Hendersonville gave a signed statement to the sheriff admitting that he and 3 other boys found Vernon's car before dark that Sunday and moved it to the location where it was found by police. They had found it near the Carolina Sales Building about 6 miles from the crime scene and took it on a joyride. While a lot is known about the two men, the life of Louise is more of a mystery. She worked at the Taylor Instrument Company in Arden. Turns out, she was a mysterious woman leading a double life that even her close family didn't know about. She had lived the past 3 years at 43 Ravenscroft Apartments in Asheville. She was described as a very private person and wouldn't even give her address to anyone. Her niece said that on a rare occasion, her aunt allowed her and her mother into her apartment. She said it was strange as it didn't appear to be lived in. She had no telephone, no pictures, and no personal items, despite often taking pictures with her camera. Her license plate was bought at the Hendersonville license tag office, with the car registered to an address on Claremont Terrace. There was no Claremont Terrace in Hendersonville in 1966. She was born August 21, 1904, but her driver's license had a birth date of 1911. Co-workers said she had the appearance of someone 15 years younger than she actually was. She had graduated Asheville High School and then attended nursing school from 1923 to 1925, but never worked as a nurse after earning her degree. Instead, she briefly moved to Florida and worked about a year in the Coral Gables section of Miami before returning to Asheville, North Carolina. In 1933, she married Azel Francis Shumate of West Virginia, and the couple moved to Massachusetts. 4 years later, she returned to Asheville alone. She remained friends with Azel, and the couple would divorce in 1942. She moved around from state to state until 1952, returning once again to Asheville, and began working at JCPenney. She never wore dresses or skirts and only wore pants, but was known to be very fashionable. Louise only told family members about one friend, Ruby Taylor of Henderson County. Ruby was a former co-worker of hers at the American Inca plant in Inca years before the murders. Ruby's husband was a co-owner of Taylor Murphy Construction Company. Louise would visit Ruby for days or even weeks at a time. Her niece said she usually appeared somewhat paranoid. Her coworkers said that she insisted on a special parking place at the Taylor Instrument Company under a large outdoor light. Coworkers said that if a car followed her too close going home, she would pull off the side of the road and let the cars pass. Strangely, she would also pick up strangers who had car trouble. A lot about her was very contradictory. She enjoyed long rides on the back roads and always wore sunglasses, even at work. Her sister described her as easygoing, but her coworkers described her as mean and racist. She also enjoyed dating and going to parties. The day before the bodies were discovered, her light blue 1962 Ford Fairlane was found abandoned near the French Broad River in the Rugby community at the end of Old North Carolina 191. It had been seen there the day before as well. Her purse was hanging on the door handle and the keys were in the ignition. Some authorities believe Louise was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was possibly picking blackberries when the murderer with his two potential victims happened upon her, as she was known to pick blackberries in that area in the past. But there's also information that shows that she was an acquaintance of Vernon and Charles. At the time, it was speculated that they were murdered for being homosexual in a small southern town. It was also speculated that the KKK had murdered them because of Charles's friendships with African-American jazz and R&B singers, or a combination of both. It was against the Klan's code of moral standards to be homosexual because, they were so moral and ethical and righteous. A cross burning took place 12 days after the murder in the early morning hours, about a quarter mile from where the bodies were discovered. Investigators ruled out the KKK theory, as Louise was allegedly known to be openly racist and against integration. It is unknown why Louise was with Charles and Vernon that Sunday, and if she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time or not. She had once told her niece that she had a close friend that had a car just like hers. She and Vernon both owned 1962 Ford Fairlanes, so it is speculated that the close friend she mentioned could have been him. Other witnesses claim to have seen Louise and Vernon together as friends in the past. Her family reported that Louise also may have been addicted to painkillers. Strangely, each Thursday, she would bring in a tightly wrapped package to work and leave it with the security guard in the guard station. Following her death, $12,000 was found in her bank account, and it was unknown how she would have that much money in her account working at department stores. Louise was known to often be taking photos, yet none were found in her home. After their murders, the belongings in Charles's home were auctioned off, and a slew of books and photos of nude children were found. Could Louise have been the photographer of these photos, and the strange weekly package she had transferred over at work contained such photos? It is also speculated that their killer could be a man named Edward Thompson Jr. He had an extensive criminal background and often kidnapped people and even killed his own father. Most of the evidence from the triple homicide, and even what led up to their deaths on that day, was very similar to crimes he had committed in the past. He was profiled in Court TV's Haunting Evidence, in which a psychic and a medium describes Edward as being the suspect, leading many to believe they solved the case. However, Edward was a black man, and no one described the man in the back seat seen with the trio as a black man. In the same county in 1972, 6 years after this triple homicide, was another triple homicide. It was determined in early 2022 that the Durham family triple homicide at their home in the Blue Ridge Mountain area was a hit committed by 4 members of the Dixie Mafia. That leads some to speculate that this triple homicide was also a hit committed by the Dixie Mafia. Many years have gone by with no answers, and we may never know the truth, and as of today, this case remains unsolved.